from Achron Shel Pesach Tafshin Yud Zayin 1957. The connection, though it is very um, uh, tenuous, is that we're going into the month of Kislev tomorrow night, and Kislev is the celebration of the Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus, and the Rebbe is going to point out the difference between Chassidus and other approaches in the idea of Simcha, among other things that the Rebbe is going to talk about. So we're going to skip over to the bottom of the page, and the Rebbe says in Lamed Daled, he speaks about, it was Achron Shel Pesach, he was saying that the end of Pesach has to be even more joy than the beginning of Pesach, and we know that the saying the Haggadah has to be with great simcha. So he says the Achron Shel Pesach has to be even more so because everything goes according to the end. So the Rebbe says at the end of this page, two paragraphs on the bottom, Omnam yeshnam ke'elu Yerushalayim, but there are those who are very frum, to put it that way. The Rebbe puts it in quotation marks. Shemahadrim b'yoyser v'mayim razal, that they are extra cautious and extra careful with what Chazal say. Asur la'adam shemolis chayk piv b'ilm hazeh. It's prohibited for a person to fill his mouth with laughter at present until Moshiach comes. V'toyanim, and they complain, l'simcha maza oisa, what purpose, what reason is there for joy? At the very time that the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. So Afal became, despite that, we know the way of Baal Shem Tov was to emphasize the idea of joy. So the Rebbe is going to continue and say, this is not a chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov, but actually this is basic Yiddishkeit as the Rambam emphasizes. This is an explicit ruling of the Rambam. B'soif Hilchos Lulav, at the conclusion of the laws of Lulav, because we're talking over there about the Simcha of the Yom Tov Sukkos, etc., Simcha Beis HaSheva, and the joy of the Lulav, etc. Kois Rambam, the Rambam writes, Simcha sheyismach adam ba'asiyas hamitzvah avoda gedolih, the joy that a person needs to have and rejoice in performing a mitzvah is a great service. It's a big deal. A person needs to do it. Ve'ein hakavod v'hagedula elo l'smoach lefnei Hashem. One's honor and one's greatness is only in rejoicing before Hashem. Meaning, do not think that by being over the top happy, this is somehow going to affect the person's honor, that they're going to be, they're making themselves cheap. So the Rambam says just the opposite. The greatest honor is to rejoice before Hashem. Like it says about David HaMelech, V'Melech David mefazes and mecharker lefnei Hashem v'goymer. King David was dancing and jumping and skipping before Hashem, etc. Now, one could think that this is only on specific occasions. So the Rebbe brings a different Rambam somewhere else, Hilchos Deis, where the Rambam writes how what needs to be their comportment, what needs to be their attitude and their character traits. The Rambam writes, a person needs to have an attention of his heart and all of his actions. When he's sitting, when he's rising, when he's speaking, eating and drinking, all of these activities, it has to be focused towards one end, leidas Hashem belvad, only to know Hashem. Nimtza, if every single action that the person does is focused on Hashem, so then it comes out, kol yom of oivdas Hashem tamid, his entire life, he is serving Hashem constantly. It's not just when he's davening or when he's learning or when he's doing some other mitzvah. It's everything that he's doing is a service of Hashem. His eating, his drinking, etc. Kol masach Shem Shemaim, that all your actions are for the sake of heaven, and b'chol drachecha de'eyu. So, and in all your ways you should know Him. Now, if you put together these two ideas. One idea is that a person must be rejoicing in the service of Hashem. And another thing is that the service of Hashem is not limited to a particular time or place, vim kain. If so, the Rebbe concludes, when we fulfill these two halachic rulings of the Rambam, so then we always find ourselves in a state and situation of joy, because there is no time that we are not doing the service of Hashem. Because even when we're eating and drinking, etc., we're serving Hashem. Even when we're speaking, we're serving Hashem. So when we are cognizant that we are serving Hashem, and we make sure to be done in a way of serving Hashem, so then the result of that is that a person needs to serve Hashem besimcha. So 24/7 he is besimcha, because 24/7 he's serving Hashem. This is even more emphasized. The joy that a person will experience, according to what's explained in Chassidus, the great quality of the mitzvahs. Even without Chassidus, one knows how wonderful mitzvahs are, but Chassidus brings that more to the fore. Through a mitzvah, there becomes a bond and an association between the Creator and His creations. In essence, there's no comparison whatsoever between a creation and the Creator. When the Creator commands a creation, a particular command, that he should do a particular activity, or even the opposite, even when the Creator commands someone to not do something, then there becomes a bond and an association between the Creator and the created being. This famous Hayyim Yom that's about this also as well. Especially according to what it's known, that Hashem and His will and His wisdom and His mind are all one. A pure unity, it's not broken down to parts. Therefore, at the time that we fulfill His will, that's the idea of mitzvahs. Then we are joined with Hashem's pure essential essence, not with a part of Hashem. If Kaviyachal Hashem, there would be like pieces, and a mitzvah touches a certain piece of Hashem, then maybe it wouldn't be such a great joy. But since Hashem is not divided into parts, therefore, when we do a mitzvah that joins with Hashem, we are joined with Hashem's entirety. And this is understood, the great joy, the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, like it's explained in Tanya, the metaphor, from the joy of a simple person and a low person, when he becomes close to a king, a human king, of flesh and blood. If this human king comes to stay in his house and lives with him in his house, so how joyous would he be to be in the presence of the king? How much more so to no end, to the closeness and to the dwelling of the King Hashem, which happens when a person does a mitzvah. Hashem is dwelling with him. To such a degree that at the time that he is hosting the king, he forgets entirely about the fact that he is a simple, ordinary person, a low person. He's unbelievable joyful on the fact that he's together with the king. Nimtza comes out, even if Chas v'Sholom a Yid finds himself in a negative situation. A person could still be with great joy because the great advantage of fulfilling mitzvahs. And we said that's not limited to any hour of the day. But in such a way, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, bringing from the Zohar, a person can have a situation where one side of his heart, it's staked out the idea of crying, and the other side of his heart is in a state of joy. So whatever negative reason, let's say spiritually, that he feels that he's not the way he's supposed to be, but he still has the joy from dwelling with Hashem, despite how far he is. Top of the next page, we say to him even more so. It's not just, okay, there's two things. You have the joy of the soul that's enjoying Hashem's closeness, and then you have the sadness that comes because of the body, that the body is preventing a yid from being close to Hashem, and he's sad about that. And that's what the Zohar was saying, that there's joy on one side of the heart and sadness on the other side of the heart. So he says it's not that way, but rather the soul is more valuable to him than the body. Like it says in Tanya, that it's more precious, his soul in his eyes, to be rejoicing in its happiness and the happiness that the soul has when he's doing a mitzvah, that Hashem is at home with the person, rather than letting himself be feeling down because of the shamed body. The Alter Rebbe says, do not mix and do not disturb the joy of the soul because of the sadness of the body. So therefore, the enjoyment and joy of the soul in the presence of Hashem, that Hashem is with him and living with him when the person is doing a mitzvah, which we said before is 24/7. He's serving Hashem all the time. So therefore, he's always joyous. He says in the second paragraph on the page, Lamed Vav, and this is the connection with the month of Kislev, because the month of Kislev points out it's the idea of what Chassidus is all about. This is also the difference between the Musar approach, the ethical teachings, which were mainly focused about all types of negative traits that a person is supposed to stay away from, to the shit of Chassidus. B'shtei hashittis, in both approaches, hatachlesi, the goal of both of them is as holikim yirav as mitzvahs shmoir, God you should fear, and his mitzvahs you should observe, kizeh kol adam, because that's the entire purpose of a person. So the goal of both are good. It's not that the goal, let's say, of Chassidus is good and the goal of Musar is not. No, the goal and purpose, what you're trying to reach, are good in both cases. The difference is the path that you're taking to reach to that goal. And what happens if you don't attain that goal and only are left with the path, as you soon can explain. Shebeshitas HaMusar, and the approach of Musar had Goshi Yal in the Sormera. The emphasis is placed on the bad that you need to turn away from. How do you place that emphasis? You contemplate how low the body is and how low material things are. And then, once after you have spent time contemplating on how low all these things are, after this introduction and preface, one arrives at doing good because he's negated all the negative things in the world, all the bad things in the world. So all that's left is Torah mitzvahs. I don't want to pursue all these bad things. But he's busy contemplating how anger is not good, and arrogance is not good, and this is not good, and that's not good. But Mash'enkim b'shittas Chassidus, as opposed to the Chassidus approach, Hadgosha hi al inyan da'asei toiv. The emphasis is on the idea of the doing good. Why is the emphasis on that? Through contemplating the great quality of the godly soul. That the godly soul is a part of Hashem, mamish from above. He contemplates that through fulfilling a mitzvah, even a very minor mitzvah, Misachdim Melech Malcham Lachem Kadosh Baruch Hu. One unites and joins with the King of Kings, Hashem. Shalachein, when a person thinks about how wonderful it is to do a mitzvah, Shum Dover Lo Yikshe Be'einav K'dei L'Kayim Ritzoyin HaBorei, nothing will be difficult in his eyes. No challenge will make it difficult for him to fulfill the will of the Creator. As we know that it's so much different carrying a bag, a heavy bag and a heavy load, if it's just filled with rocks or it's filled with diamonds or gold. It's a totally different type of experience, and it's much easier. So the Rebbe says like this: it's understood that both of these approaches are applicable to every Yid. That there's no righteous person in the land that will do good and not sin. So there's a room for the idea of sur merav, turning away from bad. What it means is that shaykh doesn't mean he has to follow that approach, but it's possible. Every person has the opportunity and has what to think about how low their body is, because as holy as they are and as much of a tzaddik they are, they always have something to repair. That's what it means that both of these approaches are applicable to every Yid. Every Yid can have deal with their negativity if they want to make that a priority. Uleidach, that also the other side, talking about the positive of a Yid is not just applicable by great tzaddikim. It's applicable by every single Yid as well. Even by the most lenient of fulfilling the mitzvahs, and even sinners. They also have the great quality that when they fulfill a mitzvah, it's an unbelievable, powerful thing, a connection to Hashem. That means that even the lowest of the low can always begin and contemplate the great quality of doing good. So in other words, everybody has an opportunity, has the capability to either choose one or the other. You don't have to be a tzaddik to choose the approach of Asay Toiv, and you don't have to be necessarily a Rasha to choose the approach of Musar, of Sur Merah. Everybody can choose one of these two approaches. So what would motivate me to do the derech of Chassidus more than the derech of Musar? So he says, let's look at the difference between them. We see in actuality the difference between these two approaches. When we're involved in the idea of turning away from bad, in other words, we're focusing on how terrible and low the body is, and how it has such terrible character traits, and how low the world is. It affects by the person that he's upset, that he's gets angry at himself, or something in that manner. Or it could be even worse. I feel gamatzvus. It could affect even something even worse than that, which is sadness, which Alter Rebbe says is worse than merirus. Merirus is, to a certain degree, there's something. It can be positive, but atzvus, the Alter Rebbe really, really doesn't like. So what's going to happen? Achron calls her, and after all of his contemplation about how terrible he is, his body is, the world is, the nature of the thing is that sometimes a person is able, because of this contemplation, to extract himself from whatever negative place he was at. Then all the meridus, all the atfus, all the sadness and upset and anger was worth it, because at least he lifted himself out of this bad place. But it's not a guarantee. Sometimes, if we use the Musar approach, he is not successful to leave behind his state and situation. He can still be stuck in whatever it was they were stuck before. ונמצא שהיה כל ימיו במרירוס ועצם קצת שפלוס הגוף עניין החומרים. What will happen? Comes out that he was involved in Musar, and all of his days he's in a state of being upset or sad because of how low the body is and how low the material matters that he's involved with. That's the risk of the Musar approach, that a person can just have been involved in the sadness without anything to show for it. There's never any guarantee. As opposed to the approach of Chassidus, where one is contemplating and involved in the Asay Toiv, meaning he's thinking about how wonderful Nefesh Elokis is and how great it is to connect to Hashem through a mitzvah and so on. It affects and causes a feeling of joy and happiness. Therefore, let's take the same approach. What would happen if he's successful, or what would happen if he's not successful? This goes without saying, if he's successful in this service, that he manages through his contemplation in Asay Toiv and the quality of a Yid and the quality of a Neshama and the quality of a mitzvah and Hashem, that definitely it's a win-win situation. But what happens, again, just like the person that was approaching with Musar, that we said, if he wasn't successful, all he was left with was this negative feeling, this merirus, this atzvus. What happens with the person that was studying Chassidus, that was involved in the positive? What happens if he's only successful in a small measure, meaning he didn't really manage to change himself? In the meantime, he was in a state of situation of joy, in an area of light. In other words, it doesn't make a difference whether the person was successful or not. At least even that involvement was a positive and uplifting experience. Sometimes Chassidim would say the same idea, but in a little different words. If a person was busy studying how bad the body is and how bad the world is and how bad my character traits are, and it didn't change him, so what has he been doing? He's been immersing himself in contemplating negative stuff. When a person learns Chassidus and he's contemplating on Hashem, he's contemplating on the Neshama, he's contemplating on the mitzvah, and that's what's preoccupying his mind, even if he didn't change, even if he didn't transform himself, he was in an elevated state. But the Rebbe says it's more than that. He's in a state of joy. And therefore, he has this unbelievable thing. Whereas, if a person is following the way of Musar, he was in a state of merirus, or even worse, in a state of atzvus. Last line on the page. Like I said before, this is a sikha from Achron Shel Pesach. So the Rebbe brings a very interesting proof from something that's in the daily davening. It says, Oz Yashur B'nai Yisrael. What's Oz Yashur? They were by after Kriyas Yamsuf, and they sang. So the Rebbe says, last line on this page, from this there's a lesson from Yitzias Mitzrayim, which has to do with the Yom Tov of Pesach. Yitzias Mitzrayim Ksiv, when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, it says, Ki borach ha'om, the nation ran away. And the Alter Rebbe asks in Tanya, why did the Moshe Rabbeinu need to imply to Paroi that the Yidden were coming back, and therefore Paroi took it when the Yidden didn't return by the appointed time, or his spies told them they weren't looking like they were turning around at the appointed time. So he came to the conclusion that they were running away. Why was that necessary? Paroi was trying to save his life. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have told him that we're going away for good, he would have let them. Why was this escape type of scenario necessary? So the Alter Rebbe explains it wasn't because of Paroi, it was necessary because of the Yidden themselves, because of their own Nefesh HaBahamis. Mavur B'Tanya, it's explained in Tanya, that the bad that's in the Jewish souls was still in its full force. This is also what it says in Parshas Shlach. That Hashem did not lead them through the land of Plishtim, which was a shorter way to get from Mitzrayim into Eretz Yisrael, which means really like going from Mitzrayim into what's presently known as Gaza. They would have gone much quicker into Eretz Yisrael than crossing the Yam Suf, etc., etc. Why? Because Hashem was worried, if they'll be too close to Mitzrayim, the nation will change their mind. V'shav Mitzrayim, they'll return to Mitzrayim. This means Shemitzad Atzmam lo yayu muchanim layitzim Mitzrayim. On their own, the Yidden were not yet ready to go out of Mitzrayim. So what actually motivated them to go out of Mitzrayim? Vayitzim Mitzrayim hoyser rak ha'idei zeh shenigla aleim melech malchei hamlachim v'shbaruch hu ge'olam. Their going out of Mitzrayim was only through the fact that the King of King Hashem came down, revealed himself upon them, and redeemed them, like it says in the Haggadah. So you might think Yidden were in such a low state, they should have merirus, they should have atzvus, they should be all bitter about their spiritual state. So the Rebbe says, no, second paragraph in the top. Still and all, they're leaving Mitzrayim, and they're going through the wilderness was out of joy. By knowing every single step, they're going closer and closer to giving it a Torah. But we know they were still bad in their nefesh, and that's why it says Kibarach Ha'am, that like Moshe Rabbeinu had to fool the Yidden themselves so that they should be willing to leave Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe says, Ein lachshav al zeh. Don't think about the bad. Why should one think about the bad? It's much more pleasant, it's much more geschmack to think about the giving of the Torah. So don't think about the bad, and don't think about that you wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. Think about the positive. This is also the emphasis on the joy by the splitting of the sea. It was a shir, it was a song. They sang a song of joy. This is also included in it, the song of the future redemption. Like the Chazal say, Shor loy namar alei Yashur. It doesn't say Oz Shor Moshe in past tense. It doesn't say that's when Moshe Rabbeinu and the Yidden sang, but it says then Moshe and the Yidden will sing, hinting at the Geulah Asidah. And therefore, this is also a lesson for us what and how to bring about the Geulah Asidah, the future redemption. This is also a lesson, a directive for the future redemption. Like we know, like your days going out of the land of Mitzrayim, I will show you wonders. In other words, what took place in Mitzrayim will repeat itself by the future redemption. That the coming of Moshiach, the Geulah Asidah, will arrive specifically through the avodah with joy, like the approach of the teachings of Chassidus, and not with the approach of Musa. Like the words of Alter Rebbe, the teachings of Chassidus is not for a particular group or community or a particular party. Chassidus is for all Jews. So that's why our Rabbeim emphasized in all the generations the need, necessity in spreading the wellsprings outward to every single Yid, regardless of their state and situation spiritually. We shouldn't tell someone that's not yet observing Torah mitzvahs, you can't come to the Tanya Shiur in the Chabad house. No, we bring him in to study Tanya, and we bring him in to study Chassidus. Maybe he should first be working on all of his negative things that he's doing. No, this positive approach is that the luminary in the Torah, which is the Pnimius HaTorah, is the luminary of the Torah, will bring him to return to tshuva, ka'amar li'il, like the Rebbe spoke about earlier in this Farbrengen, she'avas Yisrael kedemes, u'mimena v'ayada ba'im la'avas Hashem. First comes avas Yisrael, and through and from it we come to the love of Hashem, v'ad shemetzim oisim ma'agolos hamar, until we extract that person from the bitter galus of mamidim oisai bekerem oira, we place him in a location of light. When we go in this approach, we go out with joy, azai b'shalom tevolun, then you will be brought with peace. Shalom b'mamai shamayla v'mai shamata, peace between the court of heaven and the court down here below. Which is also indicating making peace between our Yitzatov and Yitzahara. V'haharim v'agvois, mountains and hills. So the Rebbe says an interesting thing. Normally, mountains and hills, they're obstacles. We have to overcome the mountains and hills. We would prefer if the mountains and hills weren't there. Like we also had with Avram on the way to the Akedah, that the Satan made himself like a mountain to block Avram's way, etc. Still in all, even though there's mountains and hills, not only will they not delay our arrival to the Geulah Sidam, but just the opposite, the idea of joy again. They will open up before you with song, with the idea of joy. And it says in Lamed Ches, I'm not just coming to say a nice drasha, but concerning actuality, that literally we should study Chassidus, Achron Shel Pesach, not just now when the Rebbe was Farbrengen, which is the final day of Pesach, and the Yisrochag the day after Pesach. A person should study Chassidus daily. B'yom Rishon on Sunday, Yom Sheni, Monday, Yom Shlishi, Tuesday, Yom Revi, Wednesday, Yom Chamishi, Thursday, Yom Shishi, Friday. How much more so a holy day like Shabbos? For sure, we should be studying Chassidus. By days at the Kuyim after Chosid Shel Moshiach L'Baal Shem Tov, through that we fulfill the promise of Moshiach to Baal Shem Tov. When your well springs will spread outward, then the Master will come. This is the King Moshiach. He will lead us upright to our land with kindness and compassion.